Welcome back, Cat 5 class. In this lecture, we're going to take a step back and go to Chapter 2. I intentionally skipped this chapter, but I think it's a good time to come back to it. So we're going to go over coordinates in AutoCAD. So the assignment for Chapter 2 will be extra credit, so there will be two handouts. One of them will be worth 50 points. The other one will be worth 30 points, so it'll be 10 points per problem. So let's get on with coordinates in AutoCAD. Next slide. Cartesian and polar coordinates. In AutoCAD, lines, circles, and other elements are defined by coordinates. The two main coordinate systems used are the following. Cartesian coordinate system. So if you're dealing with the 2D, you have your X coordinate, defines your horizontal, and the Y defines your vertical. And AutoCAD also has 3D capabilities, and the Z coordinate would be a line normal or perpendicular to the screen. We're also going to work with polar coordinates. R defines the length, and we have our angle. Next slide. Okay, before moving on with coordinates, let me recommend going to the status bar. So lower bottom right, you'll see the status bar. Click on the last icon and it'll give you a list of all the items that may be loaded onto your status bar. So anything with a check mark, you'll see the icon loaded in the status bar. I do recommend you turn on your coordinates. It's optional. If you click on coordinates, it'll add the check mark and it'll load your X, Y, Z coordinates with respect to the cursor. So if you're in AutoCAD and you're moving your cursor around, you'll see the numbers increasing, decreasing, depending on which direction you're moving. And it's with respect to the origin 0, 0, 0. If dynamic input icon is not loaded, click on it. You'll see the check mark and it'll load the dynamic input icon. And I recommend that you turn it off. So by clicking on it, if it's blue, you click on it, it'll turn gray, and that option will be off. When an icon is activated, it'll show in blue. So I'm asking you to deactivate dynamic input. Also check to see if you have polar tracking, the polar tracking icon loaded. If it's not, click on it. You'll see the check mark and it'll load polar tracking. We'll talk more about this towards the end of the lecture. And you want to have this on. Okay, so click on it. If it's gray, click on it so it'll turn blue and it'll activate polar tracking. Next slide. Creating a line using coordinates. So I recommend that you have dynamic input off as shown. It's grayed out. It's not active. Also, you may want to have ortho off. Polar tracking, it doesn't matter if it's on or off. Okay, so in this example, imagine you have AutoCAD on and you're going to use a line command. You can type in line if you like, or L for line in the command line instead of using the line icon. Click on it and then you can type in 2, 1. So this will be your XY coordinate. So it's difficult to see in AutoCAD, but you will see a green and a red line. If you look closely in AutoCAD, you'll see a red and green line, and that is your X and Y axis, and the intersection point is the origin, which is 0, 0. Okay, so after you click on the line command, you type in 2, 1, and you'll see it in the command line. You'll type in 2, 1, so that'll define our X direction, 2 in the right direction, comma, and then 1 in the vertical. Hit enter, and then you're going to type in 6, 3. Let's go to the next slide. So from the previous slide, we're going to type in 6, 3 to define our endpoint. So type in 6, 3 in the command line in AutoCAD, hit enter, and it'll define your second endpoint and it'll generate the line. Next slide. Polar coordinate system. So we're going to use our X and Y axis, and we're going to use a length and an angle to locate our point. Using the origin where the x and y axis intersect, that defines our coordinates 0, 0, our xy coordinates. The radius will represent the length to locate our point. Think of it as the radius of a circle, and this point is being located in a circular fashion. And to lock it down, we're going to use an angle. So theta represents our angle with respect to the x-axis, and we're going to go in a counterclockwise fashion. Once again, theta will represent our angle, and that'll be measured off of our x-axis going in a counterclockwise fashion. Next slide. So let's define a line using polar coordinates. So we have our first point, and it's 2.5 units away from the origin at an angle of 60 degrees. So just imagine going 2.5 units from the origin, 2.5, and then rotating counterclockwise 60 degrees to locate our first point. So to locate our first point using AutoCAD, you click on the line icon or type in line or type in L in the command line, enter to get into the command line. And you're going to type in 2.5, that's the length, 2.5. And then we're going to use the less than symbol. So the less than symbol, you're going to hit on the keyboard Shift, comma, to get to the less than symbol. Then you type in your angle, 60, enter, and it'll locate our first point. So once again, 2.5. So from the origin, we go 2.5 units. And then we rotate 60 degrees counterclockwise to locate our first point. Now let's locate our next point. To locate our second endpoint, it's a length of 7 with respect to the origin, length is 7, and then you rotate counterclockwise 10 degrees. So how do we type that in? So again, R is our length, so 7 is the length from the origin. And then we're going to hit the Shift key, comma, to get to the less than symbol, and type in 10, enter, and it'll define our second point, and it'll generate our line for us. So once again, 7 is the length. The angle is 10 degrees, counterclockwise. Next slide. Relative coordinates. If the start point of a line is unknown, you can enter relative coordinate points to create the endpoint. The symbol, the @ symbol, is placed before the coordinate point, which is your xy, if it is to be relative to the last point entered. In other words, you want to define your endpoint with respect to the last point you define and not the origin. Let's take a look at the next slide for a better explanation. So in this example, we clicked on the line icon or typed in line to create a line, and we just simply clicked in space to define our starting point. And now to locate our endpoint, to define our line, we're going to go off of our last point and not the origin. So once again, we want to locate our second point. So let's go back. We click on the line command, and with your cursor randomly click in space to locate your first endpoint. And to locate our second point, instead of using the origin as our reference point, we're going to use our first point as our reference point to locate it. So we're going to type in @ so that lets AutoCAD know that we're going to go with respect to our last point defined. 4, so that'll go 4 in the x direction, 4 units, comma, 2, and it'll go vertically up 2 units, and enter, and it'll locate our second point and generate the line. In this example, we're going to combine using simple xy coordinates and combine it with polar coordinates and using the relative option. So in this example, we're going to define our first point using xy coordinates, Okay, so we're going to type in, first we click on the line command, type in 2, 1 to define our first endpoint. So that's 2 to the right, 1 up. And to define our second endpoint, we're going to go with the length of 5 and an angle of 25 degrees counterclockwise with respect to the x-axis. This line is parallel to the x-axis. So we type in at to let AutoCAD know that it's with respect to the last point. 5, it's a length of 5, so that point can be anywhere, radially, anywhere in this area. And the angle, we'll lock it in, so we're going to type in shift, comma, to access the less than symbol, 25 degrees, with respect to the horizontal, 25 degrees counterclockwise, and that'll locate our second endpoint, hit enter, and it'll generate the line. Next slide. Click to define your starting point. And to locate our second point, how do we do that? Well, we can use XY coordinates and we can use relative XY coordinates. So we can say with respect to our last point, which is our starting point, we're not going to go in the horizontal direction, so that can be 0 for the X coordinate, and the Y coordinate will be the vertical length, which is 30. So we're going to type in at, so that tells AutoCAD with respect to our last point, which is the first point here, the starting point. 0, so we went 0 in the horizontal and 30 in the vertical. Enter and move on to the next line. To locate the next point, we know that this is a length of 40 in the horizontal direction, the X direction. So we're going to type in at to let AutoCAD know that it's with respect to the last point we created. In the X direction, we're going to go 40, comma 0, 0 because we're not moving in a vertical fashion, and hit enter and it'll generate this line. To generate the next line, first let's do a little bit of math. The length of this line is 30 minus 10 is 20. So this is a length of 20 going downward vertically. So we're going to type in at to let AutoCAD know that it's with respect to the last point we created. 0, so the X direction, the horizontal direction is 0. And we're going to put minus 20, letting AutoCAD know we're going down vertically 20 units, and enter. To generate the next line, first let's find out what's the length. We do a little bit of math. 60 minus 40 is 20 in the horizontal direction. So we're going to type in at, letting AutoCAD know it's with respect to the last line. In the X direction, we're going to go a length of 20 units, comma 0, so 0 tells us we're not going vertical. Hit enter and it'll generate the line. The next line has a length of 10. So to go with respect to the last point, we're going to type in at 0 because we're not going in a horizontal direction, and minus 10, so comma minus 10, letting AutoCAD know we're going downward vertically 10 units, and enter. And finally, to close the profile, you can either choose to just type in close to close the profile, or you can use your coordinates, relative coordinates. So at, so with respect to the last point, type in minus 60. So the length is 60, but we're going in the left direction. So type in minus 60 to go in the left direction, comma 0, because we're not moving vertically, and hit enter, and it'll close the profile. In this example, we're going to generate the exact same profile as in the previous slide, except we're going to use relative polar coordinates. So we're going to go ahead and click on the line command, click to define our starting point, and to generate our first line, which has a length of 30, using relative polar coordinates, we're going to type in at So AutoCAD knows that with respect to the last point we created, which is our starting point, we're going to go a length of 30. Length is 30. So we're going to go a length of 30 and then rotate it 90 degrees. Once again, we're going to go a length of 30 with respect to the starting point and then rotate 90 degrees to define our next endpoint and enter. To generate the next line, which has a length of 40, using relative polar coordinates, we're going to type in at. So that lets AutoCAD know that it's with respect to the last point we created. We're going to go a length of 40 at an angle of 0. So with respect to the last point, we're going to go a length of 40 and rotate 0 degrees. So it's going to stay in the same location at 0 degrees horizontally. So make sure you type in at, that's with respect to the last point, 40, and to access the less than symbol, you type on the keyboard Shift, comma, 0, and enter, and that'll generate the line. To generate the next line, which is a length of 20, it's just 30 minus 10 is 20. Using relative polar coordinates, we're going to type in at. So that's with respect to the last point. We're going to go a length of 20. So we're going to go a length of 20 at an angle of 270 degrees or minus 90. So minus 90 with respect to the x-axis. Minus 90 tells us to go clockwise 90 degrees. So the minus tells us to go clockwise. So you can either type in 270 or minus 90 for your angle and hit enter and it'll generate the line. Okay, now we can define our next line, which has a length of 20, which is 60 minus 40 is 20. And using relative polar coordinates, we're going to type in at 20, so a length of 20 with respect to the last point and at an angle of 0. Okay, so it's going to stay horizontal, length of 20, and enter, and it'll generate the line. The next line has a length of 10. So again, using relative polar coordinates, we're going to type in at, length of 10, and to get the angle symbol, the less than symbol, we're going to type in Shift, comma, minus 90 degrees. So with respect to the last point, we're going to go 10, length of 10, and type in 270 or minus 90 for the angle, and enter, and it'll generate the line. And finally, to close the profile, which has a length of 60, so we're not going to type in minus 60, we're going to just type in our length, it's absolute. We're going to use length of 60. So we're going to go with at, so that's with respect to the last point. We're going to go a length of 60. So we're going to go with respect to the last point, a length of 60, and then rotate 180 degrees to locate the final point and enter. Polar tracking. So this is separate from the previous slides from using coordinates. This is its own separate topic, but it's useful. So polar tracking. So when you create a line, click on the line command, create a starting point, and if you're going to be using a very common angle, for example, 15 degrees, 30 degrees, 45 degrees, 60 degrees. In other words, if you're going to be using multiples of 15 degrees, 15, 30, 45, 60, and so on, or maybe multiples of 10 degrees, 10, 20, 30, 40 degrees, and so on, you want to turn on polar tracking. So if you want to pick, let's say I like to use 15 degrees, right click on this icon and it'll let you pick from a list 15 degree increments, 45 degree increments, 90 degrees, and so on. I like to keep it at 15 degrees because I use 15 degrees and multiples of 15 degrees quite a bit. So select that, again, right click, select the angle you want to use, that'll define your increments, in this case 15 degree increments. And as you're generating your line, so you click to define your first endpoint, and as you move your cursor around, you'll see the tracking turn green in multiples of 15 degrees. So as I'm moving the cursor, as I'm getting ready to locate my second endpoint, as I'm rotating, this will turn green, letting me know, hey, that's a multiple of 15. And if I keep rotating, when it gets to 30, which is a multiple of 15 degrees, then it'll turn green again. And the next one, the next multiple is 45 degrees, and it'll turn green again. So this comes in handy when you're gonna use a constant angle or a multiple of an angle. Turn this on and use the polar tracking, and the green dashed lines will let you know that it's following the angle you chose or a increment or multiple of that angle. Next slide. And finally, separate topic again. We're going to talk about dynamic input. This is separate from coordinates. So dynamic input, if you want to activate it, click on the dynamic input icon. If you don't see the icon, once again, go to the end of the status bar, right click on the last icon, and from the list, turn on dynamic input. It'll load the icon. Here it's shown as off. Once you click on it, it'll turn blue, and it'll let you type in numbers on the fly. So dynamic input provides a command interface near the cursor to help you keep your focus in the drawing area. So you don't always have to be typing in numbers in the command line. This will allow you to, on the fly, type in numbers on the screen as you're generating your line. So in this case, click on the line command, define your first endpoint, click, and you have these windows that you can type in your data. So in this case, it's waiting for you to type in a length. So you can type in a length and then hit the tab key on the keyboard, and it'll move on to the next window, and you can type in an angle. You can also use coordinates. So instead of using a length and an angle, in the first window you can type in your x coordinate, comma, y coordinate. So this is something that a lot of you are going to like using, dynamic input. Typing in your data on the fly, it'll speed things up for you. And again, this is an option for those of you that want to use dynamic input. End of lecture. And on the second video, I'll be going over the two handouts. So we have the handout on the left. It'll be 10 points per problem. And we'll go over the second handout. So we're going to create this shape 3 times, once using the absolute, the second the relative, and finally polar coordinates. And that'll be 10 points each. So this handout will be worth 30 points, and this one will be worth 50 points. And once again, I'll cover this in a second video. See you on the next one.